And then I need to make sure that it's muted. Okay. This.
And you have to shrink that one.
And then this whole thing can go down. Yeah.
There we go.
All right. Now,
So,
where are my notes?
but you let me speak first.
Okay, go ahead. You speak. You won't see yourself.
Okay, so thank you all for your patience, especially those who may be in YouTube land, viewing through the YouTube, just still sorting out our technical
Yeah.
issues. And I just wanted to have a little bit of an introduction to the concept of these Thursday nights that we're trying to develop for ourselves and help with others, this concept of reflecting on the teachings. There's during the time of the Buddha, there was a common thing that people would actually memorize the teaching. And it's a learning tool. If you take a teaching internally by memorization, and it becomes a meditation too, and it may be some fragment or some section of a teaching will resonate again and again in your heart. This is the verses. If you love poetry, there's a lot of poetry in the teachings, and so some of the teaching is set to verse. Sometimes you'll see the prose, and then at the end of a teaching, there'll be some verses, and the verses help with that awakening of the heart in a particular way. But you can take also just some of the words in a particular teaching as a meditation and just reflect or read through an entire short sutta and just reflect on some of the words as you're going along. You'll also notice if you read the suttas, there's what's called ellipsis, and that means that something has been repeated again and again and again. And if you can capture what that is that's being repeated again and again and again, it's repeated for a reason. Partly for memorization, but also just that penetrates the heart a different way. So this is the concept of reflecting on the actual words, the meaning of the words. Most people think that meditation is about just shutting out any vocabulary in your mind, any words, any speech, internal speech. But this is also a method to internalize the teaching. So I will turn this over to Aya. And I'm Aya Sivijana, and this is Aya Nyanika. And Aya Nyanika will be leading the teaching tonight.
Thank you, Aya. This is going to be a teaching in brief from the Buddha, interspersed with, interspersed with my comments, and I'll talk more about how you can work with this during the time. Set up the,
So just take this in as a meditation as you're listening.
that should be good enough. All right. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Buddhang Dhammang Sangham Namassami. So the sutta reading with some commentary that serves as our reflection today is primarily from the Anguttara Nikaya 863, A Teaching in Brief. And we'll go through this sutta and we'll have meditation at the end of our time together in silence so that you can really reflect inwardly on what we're talking about today. Thank you. So I'll just begin reading and then I'll intersperse it. And the translations are a variety of them. Some are Thanissaro Bhikkhu, some are Ajahn Sujato, and a few are my own. So this is the beginning of the sutta. Then a certain monk went to the Blessed One and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "It would be good if the Blessed One would teach me the Dhamma in brief, so that, having heard the Dhamma from the Blessed One, I might dwell alone in seclusion, heedful, ardent, and resolute." The asking for a teaching in brief, this happens about 20 times in the suttas. And it's a variety of different monastics who have made this request, including the Bhikkhuni Mahapajapati. And the monastics asking for that teaching, they state that they intend to go practice in seclusion based on the teaching. And many of them do, and many of them achieve arahantship based on that teaching. But in this particular sutta, the sutta continues with the Buddha replying to this monastic. "This is exactly how some foolish people ask me for something. But when the teaching has been explained, they think only of following me around." Well, I can imagine this happening. Wow, what a great teaching. I just want to stay close to this great teacher. And the commentaries say that this is actually what this monk did in the past. So this time he repeats the request. "May the Blessed One teach me the Dhamma in brief. May the One well gone teach me the Dhamma in brief. It may well be that I will understand the Blessed One's words. It may well be that I will become an heir to the Blessed One's words." So this monastic is saying, maybe this time I'll put it into good works. And the Buddha agrees to give the teaching. Now, earlier today, Ayasuvijana was reminding me of the activities one can be doing to see clearly and become enlightened. And so I looked it up and found, there are multiple suttas, but I found the Vimuttayatana Sutta. And I thought it was really applicable to this format that Ayasuvijana outlined we're using for Thursday nights. So there are these 5 ways that activities or bases that you can be doing that are a basis for enlightenment to occur. And the first is listening to the Dhamma. So listening intently to this sutta without distraction leads to a composed mind. Well, the second is sharing the Dhamma. So even though I'm reading and commenting on the sutta, I still have a chance of also having a composed mind tonight. The third is reciting. We're not going to do that one tonight, but maybe some other week. And the fourth is by contemplating the Dhamma, which is really what this format's designed to facilitate. And finally, the fifth activity is meditation. And we'll end our time together in that way so that you can also continue this. So often when there's a program and we put the questions and answers or that kind of thing at the end, it disrupts the flow and the energy of the practice. And this would allow you to continue practicing meditation after this time, and maybe this is the night for your enlightenment. Okay, so here's the teaching in brief from the Buddha to the monastics with some explanations and practice. And I suggest that we take a posture that allows you to be receptive to the words and to contemplate them in a deep, embodied way, not just an intellectual one. Be a person with a heart for the Dhamma, showing up fully to this moment. This is the invitation, and you choose how you show up. So here we go. The Buddha replied to the monastic who asked for that teaching in brief. Then, monk, you should train yourself thus. My mind will be established inwardly, well composed. No evil, unskillful qualities, once they have arisen, will remain consuming the mind. That's how you should train yourself. This is Ajahn Thanissaro's translation. And I give other translations because it's so important. Ajahn Sujato's is, when your mind is steady and well settled internally, and bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen don't occupy your mind, then you should train like this. And my translation is, my heart will inwardly steady and well settle. No erring, unskillful conditioning arisen in the mind takes hold and remains. In this way you should practice. My heart will inwardly steady and well settle. No erring, unskillful conditioning arisen in the mind takes hold and remains. In this way you should practice. Now, remember, the Buddha is giving a teaching in brief. So a lot of things are glossed over in the instruction. But if the commentary is correct that this monastic has heard the Buddha's teachings before, he probably has a collection of things. And this is the way the Buddha is suggesting for him to go practice. In this quote, the heart inwardly steady and well settled and not letting unskillful things remain in the mind, the two main actions are, one, using mindfulness, focusing your attention inwardly, and establish your attention there. And it's interesting that in that phrasing, there's a Pali word, susantrita, and it has within it santa, which is with good posture. And the full word has translations such as well established in, well settled in, firmly fixed in. And the posture is literally stood together well. So we can consider arranging the body and the bone structure, stood together well, and then relaxing around that structure of the bones and the connecting tissues, settling in a steady way. And the second group of action described is when unskillful thoughts arise, they aren't allowed to remain in the mind, and therefore they don't continue to occupy the mind. And I'm sure all of you have heard various teachings on how you can skillfully move unskillful thoughts along. So we're not going to really go into that in detail. But I will say that the mind-heart is ready for further meditation development at the point that this is attentive in a wholesome way, and the mind-heart are not actively harboring unwholesome things. I'm including heart here because we often only apply this to the verbal or images, the things we think. But it's also very applicable to the qualities of the heart. The word chitta can be translated both as heart and mind, and it's really some sort of combination sense of those words, mind and heart. I take this as not feeding qualities such as irritation, distraction, and yearning that might appear as emotions and cause constrictions in the body. One way to not have these constrictive states overtake us is to foster a different set of qualities in the body that are supportive for the mind-heart, chitta, state to be steady and well settled. I apply a pattern myself that's warm-hearted, relaxing, spacious, soft, attending, and centering, grounding, focusing inward. Before I continue with the sutta, I'm going to give a little background of why this sutta has been so important and transformative to me in my practice. I was on retreat a while back. I'm not so long ago, but not this year. And I was practicing in an environment where most of the monastery was still going about, the normal programming. And I did something that was disruptive to the programming. The location of the bathroom at the monastery, it just made things awkward. And so I did something that was disruptive and awkward. And there was this response from the teachers that what I had done was not okay, and this kind of thing. And you can imagine mid-retreat, I've been kind of happy, and then suddenly there's this flare-up of like, but wanting to defend myself, that kind of thing. And the reason that this was strong in me was I thought I understood what our agreement was beforehand, but I also didn't want to disrupt the silence and go into some sort of conflict resolution. And so I thought, okay, let me just practice what's arising here. And I just respectfully said, thank you, I will not do that in the future for the rest of this retreat. But internally, I was stewing, I'll just say that. So I went back to my kuti, the room that I was staying in, and I thought, wow, this could really derail my practice if I let this remain. And so I was thinking, what have I read recently? What are the Buddha's words that would help me right now? And this sutta I'd read recently, and it came up. And so the next line in the sutta just grabbed at me and said, this is how to practice with this. And the next line is this: I will develop the heart's release by love. I'll cultivate it, make it my vehicle and my basis, keep it up, consolidate it, and properly implement it. Here's another translation. Goodwill as my awareness release will be developed, pursued, handed the reins, and taken as a basis, given a grounding, steadied, consolidated, and well undertaken. And then here's my translation. I develop love as deliverance of heart. I earnestly practice, master, make a foundation, experience, accumulate, and well undertake it. I develop love as deliverance of heart. I earnestly practice, master, make a foundation, experience, accumulate, and well undertake it. So this is so much more than just practicing metta on the cushion. This string of injunctions to develop loving kindness, and later in the sutta we'll see it also asks us to develop the other Brahma Viharas of compassion, resonant joy, and equipoise, as well as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is something I found needs to be more than a meditation practice. It needs to be not just on the cushion with the eyes closed. It needs to be a habit. through the day, all day, every day, in every situation. So this is why it's so important in my practice. It's changing the way that I relate to everything. It's making it far more possible for me to reflect on the suttas in an open way. So this practice of cultivating loving kindness, or as I translated it, developing love in response to everything, has really changed my relationship to everything. For the first time, I was able to fall in love with my breath, which was my object of meditation, with awareness of the body, with feeling tones, with other objects of meditation. And this capacity I've found leads to an open, willing being with. And I continue to cultivate this so that practice can be strong, nimble, responsive, clear, and bright. So with that, hopefully, sense of the value of this, you can see that the sutta continues in this way. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind, merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. So for those who know the Pali, the factors for jhana, there's vitakka and vichara. So it's talking about the different, having both of them present or only one of them or neither of them, and what's happening in your practice. And I realized with my practice, by bringing in this open, soft, warm-hearted way of falling in love with my meditation object, that I could maintain a directedness toward the object of meditation and stay touching that object. It was staying connected with the object and unifying with the object. It's like this process is like first repeatedly in approaching your meditation object and giving it a hug. So that's the vitakka and vichara. And then just being in the vichara, the contact it's like snuggling. And these images may or may not work for you, but they've just really changed my practice. So it's like I'm snuggling with my meditation object. And then eventually it's like being comfortable and just resting in a hammock with my meditation object. The sutta continues. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. In many other suttas, you'll find this kind of practice naturally leads to piti, which is this Ajahn Sucitto is translating. Oh, sorry, this is not Sucitto, this is Sujato. I'm not sure if I've been saying it's Ajahn Sujato that I've been quoting. He translates it as rapture. This rapture and pleasure, they lead to a balance of equanimity. And these things are praised by the Buddha. This kind of joy is praised by the Buddha. So we went through metta, this loving kindness in the sutta that leads to a very balanced and happy state. What the sutta then does is it turns to the other Brahma Viharas. And it says, when this immersion is well developed and cultivated, you should train like this. I will develop the heart's release by compassion. And it goes through the same stages of really being intimate with compassion, with making it a habit, with really allowing your whole disposition to be centered around compassion. And then letting that lead to a connected and directed mind that results in the joys and the balance and leading to equanimity. And then the next is, I will develop the heart's release by rejoicing. And then I will develop the heart's release by equanimity. So we've just gone through this teaching in brief with the 4 Brahma Viharas. And the rest of the sutta goes through the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which most of you here are probably quite familiar with, practicing with developing attention to the body, to feeling tones, to mental states, and to Dhamma knowings, awareness. So what I'm going to do is read through this next part about the foundations of mindfulness, and you can just sit with it, knowing that we're going through the body, the feeling, the mind states, and the awareness. So here's the sutta. When this concentration is thus developed, thus well developed by you, you should then train yourself thus. I will remain focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. That's how you should train yourself. When you have developed this concentration in this way, you should develop this concentration with directed thought and evaluation, vitaka vichara. You should develop it with no directed thought and a modicum of evaluation. You should develop it with no directed thought and no evaluation. You should develop it accompanied by rapture, not accompanied by rapture. Endowed with a sense of enjoyment, you should develop it endowed with equanimity. When this concentration is thus developed, thus well developed by you, you should train yourself. I will remain focused on feelings in and of themselves, the mind in and of itself, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. That is how you should train yourself. When you have developed this concentration in this way, you should develop this concentration with directed thought and evaluation. You should develop it with no directed thought and a modicum of evaluation. You should develop it with no directed thought and no evaluation. You should develop it accompanied by rapture, not accompanied by rapture. Endowed with a sense of enjoyment, you should develop it endowed with equanimity. And then the Buddha says, when this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, wherever you walk, you'll walk comfortably. Wherever you stand, you'll stand comfortably. Wherever you sit, you'll sit comfortably. Wherever you lie down, you'll lie down comfortably. When you've gained mastery of meditation in this manner, mindful and internally acute, and then hindrances seen and not allowed to occupy the mind-heart, attending to the meditation object with a nimble and adaptive mind-heart until it passes through joy and pleasure into equanimity, you will move through the world comfortably. That's what this sutta is telling us. And then at the end of the sutta, it says, then that monk, having been admonished by an admonishment from the Blessed One, got up from his seat and bowed down to the Blessed One, circled around him, keeping the Blessed One to his right side, and he left. He didn't hang out. Then, dwelling alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute, he in no long time reached and remained in the supreme goal of the holy life, for which clansmen rightly go forth from home into homelessness, knowing and realizing it for himself in the here and now. He knew birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for the sake of this world. And thus he became another one of the Arahants. So this time that monastic didn't just stay and follow and listen to the beauty of the Buddha and his teachings. He went to dwell in seclusion, and he practiced as instructed, and he fulfilled the aim of monastic life. He was liberated, freed from defilements, and lived out the rest of his life with his heart's release as an Arahant. So here we are, practicing with this teaching in brief. And this is an opportunity for us to settle and practice together. There is a little bit of time here. If you have a question relevant to this sutta and practice right now, you could type it into the chat. And then we will have about 40 minutes of meditation together. I'll end with a bell that allows you to just continue for as long as you like. We'll stop the Zoom stream at that time. So if you have a question specifically about practicing with this sutta, please go ahead and type it into the chat. And in the meantime, what I will do is just read through the first part of the sutta again. And if there are any questions, I will pause and take those. And if not, you can let that reading of the sutta carry you into your own contemplation towards heart release. Mendicant, practitioner, monastic, you should train like this. My mind will be steady and well settled internally, and bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen will not occupy my mind. That's how you should train. When your mind is steady and well settled internally, and bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen don't occupy your mind, then you should train like this. I will develop the heart's release by love. I'll cultivate it, make it my vehicle and my basis, keep it up, consolidate it, and properly implement it. That's how you should train. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind, merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should train like this. I will develop the heart's release by compassion. I'll cultivate it, make it my vehicle and my basis. Keep it up, consolidate it, and properly implement it. That's how you should train. When this immersion by compassion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind, merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. I will develop the heart's release by rejoicing. I'll cultivate it, make it my vehicle and my basis, keep it up, consolidate it, and properly implement it. That's how you should train. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind and merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should train like this. I will develop the heart's release by equanimity. I'll cultivate it, make it my vehicle and my basis. Keep it up, consolidate it, and properly implement it. That's how you should train. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind and merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. And it goes on, with this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should train like this. And it goes into the 4 foundations of mindfulness. I'll meditate observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. That's how you should train. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind, merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should train like this. I'll meditate on an aspect of feelings. I'll meditate on an aspect of the mind. I'll meditate on an aspect of Dhamma principles, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. That's how you should train. When this immersion is well developed and cultivated in this way, you should develop it while placing the mind and keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind, merely keeping it connected. You should develop it without placing the mind or keeping it connected. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it with pleasure. You should develop it with equanimity. And this practice will lead for our comfort in all postures, through all the situations of practice in life. So let's continue our practice together in this way in silence. And I'll ring the bell in 40 minutes.
Good night.